See, we think God's at work when we see him at work. We can hear, we can touch, like, oh yeah, God's at work. He's got purpose. But when we don't see him, when we feel like we're facing the day on our own, we start to wonder, what's God doing? But I'm telling you, God is just as purposeful when we cannot see him as when he does reveal himself. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing part of this wet, dreary, rainy day with us here at North Broadway. We're glad to have you here. Hey, a couple of weeks ago, we started a series called Keep Calm. No, keep calm. Donald, how can I stay calm? The world's falling apart. My life's falling apart. No, keep calm. The reason we can say keep calm is because God's working. Because God's working. That's why we can keep calm. Listen, we're studying a book of the Bible that honestly, let's just say it, it's a strange book in the Bible. It's a book that has 10 chapters, 167 verses, and there is not one mention of God in the book. Can't we just say together, that is odd? And there's a lot of odd things in this world. I was thinking about that this week. I came across this. Do you not find this odd right here? They stop traffic on the highway so the plane can take off. That's the airport in Gibraltar. That's odd, okay? I found this quite odd, actually, just recently. This is northern Denmark. This is where the Black Sea and the Northern Sea hit, and they can't merge because they have different densities in the water. I mean, let's admit it, that's odd. I find it odd that the Speaker of the House in Britain Parliament is not allowed to speak. That's kind of odd. It's odd that the London Bridge is in Arizona. It's odd that Dolly Parton lost the Dolly Parton lookalike contest. These things are very odd to me. But as odd as these things are, what is more odd than there to be a book in the Bible that does not mention the name of God? I mean, isn't that where we're supposed to go to learn about God? Isn't those are the pages that we read so we can discover what God is like? Yet in this book of Esther, the name of God is nowhere to be found. And some people question, why is the book even in the Bible? Some have described it, as I said, as a godless book because, well, God's not even mentioned in the book at all. Nowhere to be found. But I'm hoping and I'm praying that as we make our way through this series, we'll come to the grips that when we do not see God, it does not mean he's not around. And sometimes that's hard to grapple with because we like to be able to feel and touch and see and hear things. And when we don't, we come to conclusions that perhaps he really is nowhere to be found. He may just be in the shadows, but he's always present. It's true. Though his name is not mentioned in the book, his handprints can be found throughout the entire book. God is all over the book. I said last week, just because the name of God is not in the book does not mean that God is not in the book. Because there is no place that God cannot be found. Now, I didn't say there's no place that I don't feel like God can't be found. Because there's plenty of times we look around and we wonder, okay, God, where are you? I can't seem to find you. You know, sometimes when we feel as though we can't see God or hear God, we come to the conclusion He skipped town and He's left us on our own devices. He seems to be absent in our situation. Yes, it's true. I believe that He's got the whole world in His hand, but has He got me and my family in His hands? That's what I really want to know. When we can't see God or hear from God, we often feel like He's given us the silent treatment. And we all know what the silent treatment's like. You know, sometimes we're like, God, did I make you mad? Because I'm not hearing from you. Hey, Lord, I'm over here on floor 3, cubicle 2. I'm not hearing from you. What's going on? Haven't seen you in a while, Lord. There really is a lot to learn about God when He doesn't make Himself obvious as in places and times as He does when He does reveal Himself. See, biblical theology is really every bit as much about the seen God as the unseen God. There are times, let's admit it, in our lives we want to yell out, for the life of me, Lord, I can't find you. I don't know where you are. And the book of Esther is trying to help us to understand that just because we can't trace His hand doesn't mean His thumbprints aren't over every situation, every circumstances of our life. So in chapter 1, we discover to the king that there's trouble in the kingdom because the king's marriage is a mess. There's lots of tension. It's like over-the-top drama. Would be a great episode for the Oprah Winfrey Show. Chapter 2, we kind of get a peek into the very first episode of The Bachelor show. You know, where the king's, the bachelor's there and all these beautiful women, you know, line up and he gets to choose. And every girl's hoping to get the rose. And of course we discover that Esther's the one who gets the rose and she becomes the most powerful woman in the world. She becomes the queen of Persia. Interesting to think that the most powerful woman in the world, and God uses the most unlikely of people to accomplish or to fulfill that position. Who would ever thought that a Jewish orphan girl who's living in exile would one day marry into the royal family of Persia? That's why we said just last week, God somehow can turn the ridiculous into reality. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that an orphan girl who's living in exile would become the most powerful woman in the world. That's ridiculous, but God can take the ridiculous and turn it actually into reality. So we have been introduced to King Xerxes. We've been introduced to Queen Esther. We've been introduced to Mordecai. But to make any story captivating, you got to have a villain. And in chapter 3, we are introduced to Haman, the villain. He's arrogant, he's self-serving, he's self-promoting. He's one bad dude. And the Bible describes him actually as this, that Haman is an enemy of the Jews. He's a very powerful man. He has received every promotion known to mankind. He's worked himself up the corporate ladder, some would say. We would call him a rising star in the kingdom. In fact, King Xerxes has promoted him to where he's the highest of all the nobles. He's almost like a vice president or maybe like a vice king. Everywhere that Haman goes, people bow down and they grovel and pay him honor. Everyone does. Well, except one man, who happens to be Mordecai. Now remember back in chapter 2, verse 5, we discovered that Mordecai is a Jew living in Susa from the tribe of Benjamin. So let's put this together. You got a Jew, Mordecai. You got an enemy of the Jew, Haman, and they're in the same room. You know there's going to be tension in that room. So here's what's happening. In chapter 3, Mordecai somehow, I don't know, he's got a government job, working for the State Department, I don't know. He seems to have a job with the royal officials. He shows up at work every day. He's working outside of the king's gate. And he does his job. He shows up, and then he goes home at night. And during working hours, Haman would come along, and of course, people all grovel down. They bow down to him. They give him honor as Haman is walking by. Everybody but Mordecai. You can just picture it as he's going by. People are like, hey, Haman, I love the threads you got on. Cool sandals. Oh, so, just groveling, paying him compliments after compliments. But one guy doesn't do it. And Mordecai. And I want to tell you, it burns inside of Haman. I don't know, you ever had those situations where you get lots and lots of compliments, but you get that one negative note that just counteracts all the others? Give you an example. When I was in Virginia, I was a youth pastor, and things were really happening for us. We had a Karate for Christ program, we had this Gymnastics for Christ program, we had a weightlifting and slam jam team, and we're going out and doing evangelism on Saturdays in the parks, and things are going really well. And parents are like, this is awesome, this is awesome. Then one Sunday, I get a note in the offering plate, typed, because I would have analyzed the handwriting and did a handwriting job, typed on this very flowery paper. And in this, on this paper, it says, Dear Pastor Donald, I think you're being a bad testimony with the length of your hair to the young people of the church. Mind you, it was barely touching my ears, okay? And I'm like, the first thing that came to my mind, oh, you want to see long hair? I'm going to be the first one sporting a man bun in 1989. And I just remember it ate away at me. And I can remember for months that paper sat on my desk, and every Sunday I would say, who would use flowered paper? No, not her, not them, not them. And it actually, this one person, I was so sure this one person had done it. And I tried to be nice to this person on Sundays, but I knew. Come to find out, it wasn't her at all, and someone had actually played a joke on me. And I was like, I was in misery for all that time. But you know what that's like, right? You get these compliments, and then you get that one note or that one comment, and it just kind of eats away with it. Well, that's kind of what's happening in Haman. Everybody gives him honor. Everybody does, except one person. And that's the person that begins to eat away with him. I guess that's kind of human nature. So long story short, chapter 3, Haman tells the king there's a certain group of people that don't obey the king's command. And it would be better if we just kind of destroyed them. Now, I realize that Haman is kind of twisting the truth here, but he's saying it's in the king's best interest if we get rid of these vagabonds in the empire. And the king doesn't ask any questions. If that's what you think, Haman, go ahead and do it. And he actually takes off his signet ring, gives it to Haman so he can put the seal on the edict. And Haman just, make things, goes, hey, king, I'll even throw out an extra 10,000 talents of silver to help cover some of the cost. And so copies are sent all throughout the land, in towns and in villages and in provinces. They use that overnight, courier. I think it was the beginning of Federal Express and UPS back then. But the order was made by Haman, and it's approved by King Xerxes to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, men and women, all the little children. It was always going to happen on the 13th day of the 12th month. And the law said, whatever Jew you kill, then you can take all of their belongings. It can be yours. A little bit of deja vu for me as I was reading that again. I could think it was World War II and what Hitler was doing to the Jewish people. In verse 15, it says, let's go right there very quickly. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. This is chapter 3, verse 15. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. So you got the king and Haman, they're just kind of sitting back having, well, I would have said a Diet Coke, but I don't think that's what it says there. They sat down to drink. And they're just talking, having a good time, not realizing the entire city is in an uproar. Like there's chaos happening in the city, and they're acting like nothing is happening. They're bewildered. There's confusion. There's terror in the city. I say all of this to set up for chapter 4. So So you can follow along if you will. I'm going to read chapter 4, the first 14 verses. You can follow along in your Bibles, paper Bibles, or electronic device, whatever you may have. It says, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter in it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuch and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent him clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for the annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal province know that for any man or any woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their life. But 30 days have passed since I've actually been called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. And then probably this is the most famous verse of the book. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Who knows? Perhaps God has put you here for this time because he knew what was going to happen. Who knows that you have not come to royal position for such a time as this? So let's kind of just paint the picture of what's happening here. Esther's about 6-7 years into her marriage, and she hasn't seen her husband for over a month, because you only go to your husband, the king, when he summons you. So it's been a month. I don't know, maybe she's starting to think her marriage is on the rocks. Like, I haven't seen my husband in a month. She knows he's got a harem of hundreds of women that can be called at any time for his pleasure. The king sleeps with anyone. You think to yourself, can't be much of a marriage that's happening here. Now, I'm sure that every little girl in the kingdom is wishing to be Esther. Oh, to be able to marry a prince. Oh, to be able to marry a king. Oh, to be like Esther. She has everything. Oh, I'd love to be Esther. But you know what? Esther doesn't have everything she wants from her marriage. Yeah, she's got lots of things. But we all know things lose their shine after a while. They just don't seem to have long-term satisfaction. It's not the greatest marriage. I mean, ladies, you can only imagine you only would go to your husband if he summoned you. So news has come to Esther that her cousin Mordecai is in sackcloth and ashes. So she sends out her news out for him because she doesn't know what's even going on. He refuses. And of course, the whole entire story is revealed to Esther. In fact, I don't know how. He seems to know all the details because he even knows the amount of money that was promised from Haman to the king. And he says to Esther, you've got to go before the king. You've got to beg for mercy for us. Now remember, Esther is a Jew, but nobody knows. Because her cousin Mordecai said, don't reveal who you are. No one knows that this law that has been made will impact the most powerful woman in the world, the Queen of Persia. And she replies to her cousin, I can't go to the king. I can't do it unless I'm summoned. Because the penalty is death if I go into his presence without an invitation. Mordecai, you are 1 month too late. 30 days ago, if you've asked me, maybe I could have done something. But it's too late. It's too late now. What can I do? You're asking me to help you with something that I can't. I might have been able to do something 30 days ago, but not now. Mordecai, this is poor timing. Mordecai, it's past prime time for me. You know, I believe this is to be true for those of us who know Jesus. God develops us the most times in the middle of crisis. I don't like this plan, by the way. I've often said, Lord, is there a different way to develop me? Is there a different way to take some sharp edges off me than just the hard times? But that's what God often does. It's in the middle of a crisis that he begins to develop us. In the middle maybe of a personal crisis or a corporate crisis. You know, some of us will say, I can't fulfill my destiny right now because I'm in the middle of a crisis. I'm in the middle of a personal crisis. How can you expect me to help anybody? Look at myself. I'm in a crisis. And there's Esther. I haven't been invited to the king for over 30 days. A month has slipped by and there's been no interaction with my husband. As I said, she doesn't even know. Maybe her marriage is on the rocks. Maybe she'll be like Vashti. Maybe she's going to be expelled as well. Mordecai, I wish I could help you, but there's nothing I can do. You know what else crisis does? Crisis often changes our direction. It often, you know, we're headed this way because we got our plans, and all of a sudden a crisis hits, and somehow we get turned around and we're heading back this way. I want to tell you, in 1997, a crisis hit our family. When my dad died, I had been living for 18 years down in the States, down in the Washington, D.C. area. A crisis hit, and I never had planned to move back to Canada. It was never a part of my plan. People that know me, my plan to move from Virginia was Florida. That was the next move. But somehow God took me 1,000 miles north to Nova Scotia. But God had to use a crisis in our family's life to redirect where I was planning on going. Remember the verse we looked at last week in Ephesians 1:11. God is working all things out for the conformity of his will. He's working it all out. He's working things out in my life in conformity to his will. He's working things out in our lives so we get to the point where we will want what he wills. As I said, I never had the desire to move back home, but yet God used a crisis to change my direction. For Esther, it seems like it's bad timing to lean into her destiny because she's past prime time. 30 days ago would have been perfect timing. I like actually how Beth Moore says it. She says, God's time is always prime time. It's always prime time. Esther, you are in your prime time. I said a couple of weeks ago that it will take some courage and perseverance to reach your destiny. And so right now we have two crises that are happening. There's a personal one and a corporate one. For Esther, she hasn't been with her husband in a month. She's got a personal crisis, but she's got a corporate crisis too because her people are going to experience genocide shortly. If there was ever a time that Esther felt inadequate, boy, it was right then and there. If there was ever a time that Esther felt threatened, it was now. If there was ever a time that Esther felt pushed into a situation that seemed overwhelming, it was now. The burden put on her shoulders almost seems unreasonable. She's over her head. It's more than what she can do on her own. I don't know if you ever feel like you carry a burden that seems almost unreasonable. Like, Lord, I can't handle this. I have some really good friends, some of my closest friends from Nova Scotia, Gary and Rachel. And I've known Rachel for years and years, and Gary and I, we were roommates together, and they got married, and then they had a baby boy named Ryan. And Ryan was a sick baby, and he never left the hospital for a year. And Rachel never left the hospital for a year, right beside her baby. And Gary would come in night after work. And that baby was here for a year. And finally, one of the diagnoses was that they had CF, cystic fibrosis. They thought, okay, we can face some of these challenges. We know it needs to be done. We know the mask and we know the lung exercises. We'll be able to do this. And then Gary and Rachel had another boy, their second boy named Ryan. And Ryan had CF. I'm like, okay. I remember thinking, oh, Lord, Lord, this seems like it's too much to have two special needs. And then Gary and Rachel had another, a little girl. Little girl had CF. And I just remember thinking, it's almost unreasonable, Lord, that you would expect this one family to have all that going on. And then I look at their lives today, and I go, wow, did God ever have something far bigger than I ever saw going for them? The scores of opportunities that my friends Gary and Rachel have had to interact and be with families who have special needs has been incredible. Their ability to kind of share their faith and how God, sustains them through this, it's been incredible. Families they would never have interacted with if these crises hadn't hit their family. Look at verse 14 again. But you and your family will perish. Okay. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. The emphasis is you, Esther. Esther, you need to do something. It's up to you, Esther, to do something. It almost seems unreasonable, the burden that she's bearing. It all seems to hinge on her shoulders. I don't know if you've ever gone to a parent-teachers meeting when a teacher says to you something maybe like this about your child. You need to spend more time with your child doing homework. You need to discipline your child more. You need to make sure he gets more sleep so he's not so cranky at school. You need to make sure that he's practicing his instrument more. You need. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, that seems so overwhelming as a parent. I can't do it all. Maybe someone has said to you, Dad, you need to spend more time at work. You need to make sure that our profits go up this quarter. You need to be willing to invest more in your team. You need to make some employee cutbacks. You need to do more team development. You need. And you're like, oh, I can't carry the weight. It's too much. Can't carry this burden. Well, I kind of think that's how Esther's feeling right now. I think that's how she felt. How can I help anyone, she's thinking. How can I do that? I'm in the middle of a personal crisis. I'm the last person you should be coming to ask for help. There's all these cutbacks at work. I can't really help anyone. I'm trying to raise my kids on my own. I can't help someone else. I've got a reputation to protect. I can't be helping someone else. Esther says, how can you expect me to help you when I haven't even seen my husband in over a month? So here's Esther. She's living in the capital of Susa. And she doesn't even know what's happening in her own city. She doesn't know the latest news. She has been so isolated that I really think she feels incompetent to be able to do it that's been asked of her. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, there are so many times we feel incompetent to reach the destiny that God has created for us. And maybe for some of us, we say, well, it's just bad timing right now for me to reach that destiny that God's called me. It's just unreasonable, the burdens that I carry, to be able to reach that destiny that God has actually created for me. I was thinking about destiny and what God has created us for, and I really think that destiny requires transparency. Mordecai is telling Esther, no longer can you hide who you are. You can no longer hide that you are a Jew. It is time to reveal who you are. I really think this is true for the church. When we're transparent with people, we identify with people with problems. I think sometimes we forget maybe the hole that God has dug us out of. And every now and then I think we have to be reminded. See, our testimony is far more effective than when we just act like we have no problems and we've never had a problem in our life. I'm very aware that being transparent is also quite risky. I get that. What will it mean for me? What will people think of me if they know who I really am? I'm not saying tell people your deepest and darkest secrets and admitting to all that. I'm just saying we identify with people when we acknowledge, yeah, I'm struggling too, actually. I'm trying to make it myself. It's always surprising to me when I meet people in church who will share something about the problem, think that they're the only one. There could be hundreds of people there, but they're the only ones that have this problem. And I think when we hide, and we're not transparent, we get in our little cocoons and our solos, and we face the battles on our own. Well, there's a lot of drama happening right now in this chapter. There's lots of tension in the air. It could be cut with a knife. It seems to be the worst time to be asking Esther for some help. But it seems to be the perfect time for God to use Esther. It's not a good time for Esther to be used, she thinks, but it's perfect time for God to use Esther. Mordecai says, God will deliver us, and you are at great risk if you don't help us. That's when we begin to say, well, where is God in all of this? Jews are his chosen people, and look what's happening to the Jews. Where is God? That's what the Jewish people are asking as they're in sackcloth and ashes, and they're wailing. They're like, where are you, God? You've abandoned us. We see you nowhere. Why have you allowed this to happen? Have you forgotten? God, do something. And this is the time, of course, where we want some miraculous work of God to happen, some lightning bolt to strike Haman, and where the king is able to do something about that law and come up with an alternative plan. Let me tell you something. I'm learning this, by the way. God is just as purposeful when we cannot see him as when he does reveal himself. See, we think God's at work when we see him at work. We can hear, we can touch, like, oh yeah, God's at work. He's got purpose. But when we don't see him, when we feel like we're facing the day on our own, we start to wonder, what's God doing? But I'm telling you, God is just as purposeful when we cannot see him as when he does reveal himself. Who knows that you haven't been brought to this royal position, Esther, for such a time as this? Who knows that you have not been crowned the queen of Persia for such a time as this? Who knows that you haven't made the palace your home for such a time as this? Who knows, sir, that you haven't been placed in your working environment for such a time as this? Who knows, teacher, that you haven't been placed in that classroom for such a time as this? I know the timing seems really bad right now, but who knows where you are for such a time as this? And maybe you're here and you're saying, Donald, you don't understand. The burden really that I'm carrying right now, it's unreasonable. Too hard. But who knows that you're not right here at North Broadway for such a time as this? Who knows? I'll tell you who knows. God. That's what I love about Jeremiah 29:11 that says, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. I have a plan and I already know them. And I love this part when he says, these plans are not to harm you, actually. I got a plan that's going to give you hope and a future. I tell you who knows the plan. I know why you're here for such a time as this, because God's got a plan. And it's a good plan because it's a plan that's going to give us hope and it's going to give us future. Listen, we are people of purpose. God has created us with purpose. And it's true, our ways are not his ways. His ways are so much higher than our ways. And I pray that each of us will understand that you and I, we have been created for a destiny. And yes, it's going to take courage and it will take perseverance. And I know there's times that we'll say, this is all bad timing. It's just bad timing for us to do something. I know we'll think that the burden's too heavy for us. It's unreasonable. And I know in times we'll go in this protective mode and we won't be transparent and we will hide in our little cocoon. It's hard to reach your destiny. We're not transparent. And yes, I admit it is risky when you are transparent. I get that. But the risk, I believe, is worth it. Psalm 100 verse 3 says, "The Lord is our God, and it is He who made us, and we are His children." And God looks after His children. Sometimes we forget that. We're a child of God. God looks after His family. He looks after His children. Yes, there are going to be times we wonder, what happened to God? Where did He go? Why does it seem like I'm fighting this battle all by myself? Why are you giving me the silent treatment, God? And just because you don't recognize God in your circumstances, just because I don't often see God in my circumstances, does not mean God is not there. He may just be over there in the shadows, but He's always there. Ephesians 1, we've already talked about that. He's working all things out. He's working all things out in the conformity of His will. And then Philippians 2:13 tells us He's working it out in you. He's working it out. He's working it out in us. He's working it. Because He's always working behind the scenes of our life. He's never forgotten us. That gives us the opportunity to live out our destiny. So I want to tell you, keep your eyes on Jesus. Even when you can't see Jesus, keep your eyes focused on Jesus, because there is absolutely no reason to ever doubt that God has forgotten you. Never. He made a promise to His children that He would never leave us. He would never forsake us. Never, not even once, not once have we ever slipped through His mind. I look what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10, verse 29. He says, "And are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." If God is so concerned when one of the sparrows falls to the ground, why would you ever think He doesn't care for you? Like you're His child. Of course, He cares for you. So when life seems totally out of control, when it seems to be spinning faster and faster, more than you can handle, when your circumstances to be overwhelming you, I just want to encourage you, don't forget God. He hasn't left you. He hasn't abandoned you. He just may be over there in the shadows. But He's always at work. He's always working. And that's why we can keep calm. Esther's cousin is telling Esther, things seem really bad right now. Yes, Esther, I get it. I know. It is really bad right now. Genocide is creeping at your door. It's creeping at your family's door. It's creeping at your people's door. But Esther, this is your time. This is what you have been created for, Esther. For such a moment as this. Esther, this is your destiny, what God has created you for. So let me remind you, God is always working. Always. He's never been caught napping. Never once was He caught resting. Never once did He go on a hike by Himself and leave everyone else behind. No, God is always working behind the scenes of our life. And I love this part. For our good. For our good and His glory. And I know sometimes our circumstances don't always look good. They don't. We just see the small things around us. We're like, this is not looking good at all. But there's a far greater picture that God's working on. And this greater picture is for your good. For your good. It's for my good. It's for our good. God's always working behind the scenes of our life. Let's pray. Father, I know when we come on a Sunday morning like this, we've already said it, but we know in a room this size, there's just people right now that are questioning, where are you, God? There's some people right now, Lord, that are struggling because they feel as though maybe you've abandoned them. You've left them on their own. But God, that could not be farther from the truth. We may not be able to trace your hand, But God, your fingerprints are all over our lives. And so, Lord, for those days that maybe we get a little short-sighted, and those days where we begin to forget that God made a promise to us to never leave us, never forsake us. God, give us the confidence when we leave this room here today, though sometimes our life feels like it's out of control, give us the confidence to know the truth. And the truth is God has never left us. And the truth is just because we can't see him doesn't mean he's not working. Because he's always working. You are always working in our life. And what's so powerful is that you're working for our good. You have us in mind. You're working all things out for our good and for your glory. So, Lord, encourage us today as followers of Jesus to know that those days where we don't feel you, maybe we don't hear from you, we can't see you, remind us, God, you're at work. And we can keep calm because you're always working. And you know the plan. And that plan is to give us a hope and a future. And we thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. As we sing.
Hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. My hope is built on trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne.